No one was ever supposed to know this. The parchment itself was a ghost, a brown, brittle receipt hidden in a courthouse ledger for nearly 2 centuries. It recorded the sale of a 19-year-old boy for 17 cents, a number so small it feels like mockery. But the true horror isn't the price. It's what the receipt erased. Behind that ink was a life, a mind, a brotherhood betrayed by power itself. Augustine Parish, Louisiana. 1849. The air thick with swamp heat and secrets. A judge who believed he could rewrite truth. A young man who refused to stay erased. A world built on silence, control, and the quiet obedience of men who feared losing everything. This is not the story of slavery. It's the story of rebellion inside the human soul, of what happens when one man's defiance threatens an empire of lies. A war fought not with armies, but with memory. And it all began with a receipt for 17 cents. If stories like this move something in you, if you believe forgotten truths deserve a voice, take a second to like, subscribe, and share this film. Every click helps keep these buried histories alive. You're not just watching a story, you're becoming part of its witness. The air that morning was thick enough to taste. Swamp mist hung low over Augustine Parish, blurring the edges of the courthouse like a mirage. Men moved slowly, as though afraid to disturb something ancient and watching. Every sound carried. The creak of a wagon wheel, the scrape of a boot, the distant caw of a crow. To the men gathered on the courthouse steps, it was just another day of trade. Land, tools, and lives. But one name would be written differently today. The auctioneer, Bartholomew Crane, fanned himself with a folded ledger. Sweat traced dark lines down his neck. He cleared his throat, glancing toward the courthouse window above. Behind the glass, Judge Alistair Finch watched, motionless, like a stone carving of authority. The judge's eyes never blinked. His jaw stayed fixed, carved in quiet contempt. To him, this wasn't punishment. It was correction, a reminder to the parish that no man rose above his script. Bartholomew's voice cracked the silence. Lot 31. Property of the parish, sentenced by law. Opening bid, 17 cents. The words fell like stones into a pond, ripples spreading through the crowd. No one spoke. No one laughed. Even the flies seemed to hold still. 17 cents. It was an insult so calculated it became holy, a declaration that a man's life could be measured smaller than a coin's weight. Kalin's gaze lifted toward the window. He saw the judge's shadow and understood. This wasn't about money. It was a performance, the final act in a play written to erase him. Yet there was no fear in his eyes, only a quiet defiance that burned slow, like coal. Among the crowd stood men of the parish, farmers with cracked hands, debtors in faded coats, clerks clutching folded papers. Each of them felt the same cold whisper crawl up their spine. That silence was safer than sympathy. The auctioneer hesitated, scanning for a bid. No hands rose. He could feel the judge's gaze pressing against his neck like a blade. This was supposed to end neatly. No one was meant to interfere. Kalin would remain unsold, condemned to the parish work farm. A death by exhaustion. Then a single voice cut through the stillness. "I'll take him." The words came from the back, soft but clear. Heads turned. A small, rough-handed man stepped forward. His name was O'Connell, a war veteran with more scars than fortune. Bartholomew blinked, stunned. He looked again at the window. The judge's silhouette shifted, a flicker of irritation slicing through the curtain. The bid was legal. It had to stand. 17 cents? Once, the auctioneer stammered, his voice trembling. O'Connell stepped forward, coins clinking softly in his palm. The clerk scribbled his name onto the paper, hands shaking as though the parchment itself were cursed. Kalin watched in silence, his expression unreadable. From the courthouse window, Judge Finch turned away. The game had changed. He would not show anger, not yet. But inside him a quiet fury coiled like a serpent preparing to strike. O'Connell took hold of the rope, cutting it loose. "You can walk now," he muttered. Kalin's wrists were raw, skin blistered, but he said nothing. He simply followed the man down the courthouse steps, away from the murmurs and eyes that refused to meet his. The sun pressed down hard, heat rising in waves from the dirt road. The sound of cicadas filled the space between words. Every step carried the weight of something unspoken. Two men bound now by a transaction neither fully understood. At the edge of the square, O'Connell paused. "You got a name?" he asked. Kalin's voice came quiet, steady. "Kalin?" The man nodded once. "Well, Kalin, the soil out my way's mean as the world. Hope you know how to handle both." They walked until the road turned to dust, until the courthouse disappeared behind trees heavy with moss. The world around them hummed with insects and memory. Augustine Parish was a place where men's stories sank into mud faster than graves could be dug. Kalin's silence wasn't submission. It was survival. He'd learned that words could be used as chains and silence could be sharpened into a blade. Behind his calm, something was gathering. Purpose, patience, and an anger so controlled it was nearly holy. By sundown, they reached O'Connell's land, 3 acres of stubborn clay and crooked fences. A small shack leaned toward the swamp like it was tired of standing. "Ain't much," the man said, tossing a glance back. "But it's what's left." Kalin looked at the house, then at the horizon. He felt the weight of unseen eyes watching from the distance. The judge's reach didn't end at the courthouse. Control in Augustine Parish wasn't about proximity. It was about belief. That night, the crickets screamed in the dark. Kalin lay awake in the corner of a small barn, staring at the cracks of moonlight spilling through the boards. He thought of the library, of the scent of old paper and secrets. He thought of what was taken from him. He whispered to the shadows, not a prayer, but a promise. "You can erase my name," he murmured, "but not what I remember." The wind outside shifted, carrying the faint echo of a mockingbird's cry. It sounded like defiance. Across town, Judge Finch sat in his study, the lamplight carving his face into harsh geometry. He reread the sale receipt, the ink still fresh, 17 cents. The number gnawed at him, a misstep, a breach in perfection. He poured whiskey into a glass but didn't drink. His reflection in the window stared back, eyes hollow, edges sharp. Power had kept him upright for decades, but power fed on fear, and fear required control. The boy's survival was a crack in the wall. He summoned Sheriff Dorsey, a man who had built his entire livelihood from the judge's favor. "Keep eyes on him," Finch ordered, voice low. "The O'Connell farm, twice a day, quietly." Dorsey nodded once, hat pressed to his chest. Orders from Finch were scripture. As the sheriff rode into the night, Finch turned his gaze toward the darkness beyond the window. 17 cents, he whispered. "Let's see what that buys you." His hand tightened around the glass until it cracked. At dawn, Kalin was already working. His body moved with quiet precision, each swing of the hoe methodical, deliberate. O'Connell watched from the porch, pipe in hand. "You've done this before," he said. Kalin didn't answer. The man's farm was failing. Too little rain, too much debt. Kalin could feel the exhaustion in the land itself, like it mirrored its master. But he worked without complaint, his movements almost ritualistic, as though trying to cleanse something that couldn't be washed away. By midday, sweat soaked his shirt. The sun burned white over the fields. O'Connell handed him a tin cup of water. "Ain't many last this long out here," he said. Kalin took it, nodding once. "Endurance," he replied, "isn't a gift. It's what's left when everything else is gone." The older man looked at him, something in his tone striking deep. "You speak like a preacher." Kalin smiled faintly, though it never reached his eyes. "Preachers talk of salvation. I talk of survival." That evening, when the world dimmed into golden shadow, O'Connell sat sharpening his knife, glancing toward the barn. "You got secrets, boy?" he asked quietly. Kalin didn't look up. "We all do. Some keep us alive. Some bury us." The man nodded. "Fair enough." He didn't ask again. In places like Augustine, questions could get a man killed faster than bullets. Weeks passed. The sheriff's riders came and went, silent as ghosts. Kalin felt the surveillance like a weight pressing against his spine, but he also felt something else growing, a sense of purpose rising through the cracks of fear. He began to fix things on the farm no one had touched in years: tools, irrigation, fences. O'Connell noticed, but said nothing. He recognized the rhythm of a man working to stay sane. He'd seen it before in soldiers who survived war but never left it. Late one night, thunder rolled across the parish. Rain slammed against the roof, leaking through in steady streams. O'Connell lit a lamp, found Kalin awake, staring out at the storm. "You don't sleep much," he said. "No," Kalin answered. "Sleep feels like surrender." The man studied him for a moment. "Whatever you're fighting, son, make sure it's worth the scars." Kalin turned, eyes steady. "It is." His tone carried no doubt, only inevitability. The next morning, the rain had cleared. Mud clung to everything. A rider passed on the distant road. Not the sheriff this time, but someone darker, slower, deliberate. Kalin's instincts sharpened. Trouble was moving closer. He didn't speak of it. He just worked harder. The field became his battlefield, the hoe his weapon, the soil his confessional. Every swing was an oath, not of vengeance, but of remembrance. He would not vanish quietly. That evening, O'Connell found him by the fence, hands bloody from the wire. "You're pushing too hard," he warned. Kalin looked at the horizon, eyes distant. "You can't break what's already broken." The older man didn't argue. He understood the tone. It was the voice of someone who had seen something sacred destroyed and had chosen endurance over madness. Days blurred into weeks. Kalin spoke little, ate less, but his presence began to alter the air around the farm. There was order now, purpose. Even O'Connell felt it, a strange calm threaded with unease. Then one morning, the sheriff rode up slow, boots heavy with mud. "Judge Finch sends his regards," he said, voice casual but eyes sharp. "Just checking the property." O'Connell nodded, jaw tight. "You've checked," he said. "Now leave." As the rider disappeared down the road, Kalin exhaled softly. "He's still watching," he said. O'Connell spat tobacco into the dirt. "Then let him watch. Some men only feel powerful when someone else is kneeling." That night, Kalin found an old scrap of parchment near the woodpile, an invoice signed by the judge years ago. He studied the handwriting, tracing each letter with his finger. Power leaves marks, he thought, even in ink. He tore the parchment in half and burned it in the lantern flame. The paper curled, blackened, vanished. He watched until it was ash. 17 cents, he whispered. "Let's see how much that truth costs you." Outside, thunder rolled again in the distance, slow, patient, and coming closer. The mansion stood at the edge of the swamp like a monument to control. White columns, spotless windows, and gardens trimmed to geometric precision. But beneath the beauty was rot, quiet, and deliberate, like the mind of the man who ruled it. Judge Alistair Finch believed in order the way other men believed in God. He saw chaos as a disease, and he fancied himself the cure. His law was not justice. It was obedience carved into the hearts of men. He sat in his study, the same one where he'd signed Kalin's sentence. The walls were lined with books, but they weren't for reading. They were trophies. the voices of other men caged in leather. To Finch, even knowledge was something to own. The judge's reflection stared back from the window. The swamp behind him shimmered, restless. He could feel it. The parish itself pulsing under his rule, every debt, every secret, every name. He didn't rule Augustine Parish by the law. He ruled it by the weight of silence. Sheriff Dorsey entered quietly. "Ryder came from the O'Connell place, sir," he muttered. "The boy's working steady, keeps to himself." Finch's eyes didn't move. "And the widow?" The sheriff shifted. "Nothing unusual." "Nothing unusual," Finch repeated softly, as if testing the phrase. "Do you know what nothing means, Dorsey? It means stillness. Stillness hides infection. That boy is infection." His voice carried no anger, just precision. The sheriff nodded, uneasy. "You want him gone?" Finch's gaze hardened. "Not yet. Not until I know what he remembers." He turned back toward the window. "Memories are dangerous things. They don't die when you kill a man." Outside, thunder murmured across the swamp. Finch's fingers tapped the desk in rhythm with it. "Keep watching," he said, "and send word to Roach. Tell him to prepare." The sheriff swallowed. "Roach? Thought he was finished with parish work." Finch's lips curved slightly. "No one's ever finished. Not while they owe me." The sheriff hesitated, then left. The judge remained still, watching the rain smear the reflection of his face into something monstrous. That night, far from the mansion, Roach returned to Augustine like a rumor. A tall man, thin as a blade, skin like bark, eyes the color of stagnant water. He spoke to no one. He didn't need to. His arrival was its own message. Roach's shack lay deep in the cypress. Men said he could find anyone who didn't want to be found. Some said he could smell fear. Others said he'd lost his own long ago. Finch had used him once before, and the dead had stayed that way. When Finch met him again, there were no greetings, just orders. "I need you to erase a mistake," the judge said. Roach's grin was slow, broken. "How clean you want it?" "Clean enough to look like God did it himself." Roach nodded, the sound of his boots on marble like claws on bone. "Who's the man?" Finch handed him a single folded slip, the receipt. 17 cents, Roach read, smirking. "Cheap one." "Expensive," Finch corrected. "He cost me silence." Across the parish, Kalin woke in the dark, heart pounding. He didn't know why, but he could feel something shift, a disturbance in the unseen pattern that governed his days. He stood at the barn door, listening. The swamp was too quiet. In the main house, O'Connell stirred. He saw Kalin framed in the doorway, the faint outline of a man listening for ghosts. "Can't sleep again?" he asked. "No," Kalin said. "Something's coming." The veteran grunted. "Something always is." The next day passed heavy with tension. Even the wind refused to blow. Kalin worked, but his eyes kept flicking toward the tree line. Every instinct told him the noose of the judge's power was tightening again. O'Connell noticed. "You've been hunted before," he said. Kalin nodded slowly. "Every man in Augustine's been hunted. Some just haven't noticed yet." In town, Sheriff Dorsey sat at the tavern nursing his whiskey. He didn't like this job. Finch's orders were always too clean, too quiet. He felt the eyes of the parish on him, wondering what he'd do when judgment came for the judge himself. That night, Roach moved through the trees without a sound. He was a ghost of habit, breathing in mud, breathing out dread. The widow's cabin flickered with lantern light in the distance. He smiled faintly. "Too easy," he whispered. But Kalin was waiting. He'd known from the moment the crickets stopped. He'd spent days memorizing the sounds of the swamp. When they stopped, something deadly moved. He slipped from the barn, silent, blending into the trees like shadow meeting shadow. Roach saw the movement too late. A branch snapped behind him, deliberate. He spun, knife ready. Nothing, just rain sliding off leaves. "Clever," he murmured. "Let's play, boy." Kalin didn't fight head-on. He drew Roach deeper, step by step, into the waterlogged hollow behind the farm, the place locals called the Blind Pit. The mud there could swallow a man whole without leaving a trace. When the tracker realized where he stood, it was too late. The ground beneath him shifted. Roach lunged, knife flashing, but Kalin moved faster, shoving his shoulder hard into the man's chest. The swamp opened like a mouth. Mud closed over Roach's legs, then his waist. He hissed, "You can't kill what's already dead." Kalin's face stayed blank. "Then you'll feel right at home." The tracker's scream choked into gurgling silence as the swamp claimed him. Kalin stood motionless, breathing hard, eyes reflecting moonlight. He'd made his first move in a war the judge didn't know had started yet. He whispered to the dark, "You sent a shadow. I buried it." Back at the mansion, Finch woke in the night. The air felt colder, heavier. He couldn't explain it, but he sensed imbalance, as if a string had snapped somewhere in the invisible web of his control. He poured another drink, staring at the receipt pinned to his wall. The ink had started to fade. 17 cents, he murmured again, "and still you cost me peace." His knuckles whitened around the glass. By morning, rumors crawled through Augustine. A stranger seen entering the swamps hadn't come back. The sheriff avoided the judge's eyes when he delivered the news. Finch listened in silence, then said, "Dig nowhere. Ask nothing. The swamp buries its own." He dismissed Dorsey, then sat alone, fingers steepled beneath his chin. He wasn't afraid of loss. He was afraid of witnesses. Every act of erasure left residue, and somewhere, someone was beginning to see through his design. Kalin returned to the fields at dawn, face unreadable. O'Connell said nothing. He just noticed the boy's shoulders were looser, his movements quieter, calmer, like a man who'd done what had to be done. That evening, they shared a rare silence that felt like brotherhood. Two men who understood violence without needing to glorify it. O'Connell poured a small glass of rye, setting it beside Kalin. "Whatever ghost you buried, may it stay there." Kalin nodded, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "Ghosts don't stay buried," he said softly. "Not in this parish." Far away, the judge lit a cigar, smoke curling around him like scripture. He believed in dominion, in keeping men as lines on a ledger. But for the first time, he wondered if one line had started to write back. As night fell, a storm gathered again, rolling low over the bayou. Lightning flashed against the courthouse dome, illuminating the word carved above the doors. Justice. Finch stared at it through the rain. He almost laughed. Because in Augustine Parish, justice wasn't blind. It had his eyes. And now, somewhere out there in the dark, those eyes were looking back. Dawn crept over Augustine Parish like smoke, thin, uneasy, gray. The air was heavy, and even the swamp seemed to hold its breath. Kalin rose before the light reached the fields, moving with a quiet purpose that felt different now, sharper, deliberate. He had buried a man 2 nights ago, but in truth, he'd buried something else. Fear. For the first time since the courthouse steps, he no longer felt like a piece of property. He felt like a question the judge had failed to erase. O'Connell noticed it. "You walk lighter," he said, stirring his morning coffee. Kalin looked at him, expression unreadable. "Dead weight's gone," the veteran grunted. "Hope it stays that way." He didn't ask for details. Men like them didn't need explanations, just results. But the judge's world was built on systems, not souls. And when a piece of the system disappeared, it left a hole he couldn't ignore. In his study, Finch marked a name off his ledger, Roach, and drew a slow circle beside it. "He's learning," he whispered. "The boy's learning." He called for Sheriff Dorsey again. "We'll smoke 'em out," he said. "Fire draws out every living thing, even ghosts." The sheriff's stomach turned. He'd seen Finch burn fields before, not for punishment, but for display. Control by example. "You sure you want to—" "Yes," Finch cut him off. "Make it an accident. I want him to feel the cost of disobedience without the satisfaction of rebellion." The words carried the precision of a surgeon's blade. Dorsey nodded and left, knowing what was expected. Destruction disguised as justice. Back at the farm, Kalin was building something. Not for the fields, not for the crops, something small made from wood scraps and wire. O'Connell asked once what it was. Kalin replied simply, "A reminder." That was enough. By nightfall, a faint smell drifted on the wind. Smoke. O'Connell's head snapped up. "That ain't chimney smoke." Kalin's eyes narrowed toward the tree line, where an orange glow flickered low. "The judge," he said. No panic, no surprise, just certainty. Flames spread fast through the underbrush, crackling like laughter. O'Connell ran for buckets, but Kalin stopped him. "Water won't stop a message," he said. "He's not burning land. He's burning warning." The older man froze, the truth settling in. "Then what do we do?" "We write back." Kalin's voice was calm, steady as stone. He grabbed a charred branch from the fire line, black ash staining his hands. "If he speaks in fire, I'll answer in ink." O'Connell watched, confused, as Kalin knelt in the dirt and began drawing a pattern, lines intersecting like a map. It wasn't random. It was a memory. Beneath the soot and soil, the lines formed a shape, a church, small and old. O'Connell recognized it. "The old parish chapel?" Kalin nodded. "Behind the hearthstone. Something hidden there. Something the judge never found." O'Connell squinted. "What kind of something?" Kalin's tone darkened. "Proof." He stood wiping his hands. "If he burns my life, I'll burn his truth." He looked toward the horizon where the smoke bled into dawn. "There's a book in that church. A book he fears." They set out at dusk, walking through cypress shadow and mud thick as secrets. The old parish church sat half sunk in earth, its bell long since fallen. The door groaned open like a confession. The air inside smelled of ash and time. Kalin went straight to the hearth, kneeling before the crumbling stone. His fingers traced the wall like a man remembering a dream. He pressed against one brick, then another, until one shifted under his hand. "Here," he said quietly. O'Connell crouched beside him as Kalin pried the stone loose. Behind it, wrapped in oiled cloth, was a small leather-bound book, the kind that looked ordinary until you touched it. Then you felt its weight, unnatural, electric with meaning. Kalin's hand trembled for the first time. "This is it." He opened the cover, revealing neat script, darkened by age. The pages were filled with lines of text, some written in English, others in an older tongue. "What's it say?" O'Connell asked. Kalin stared at the words for a long time before answering. "It says a man can be owned by law, but not by memory." He turned another page. "And it says the judge fears both." He closed the book gently, like a relic. O'Connell exhaled slowly. "So this is your weapon?" Kalin nodded. "The only one that matters." He tucked the book under his coat. "This story belongs to every man who's been erased. It's time someone reads it aloud." Outside, the fire's glow had faded, but the smell of smoke lingered, a scar on the wind. They started back, silent, but alert. Kalin knew the judge wouldn't stop. Not now. The man would scorch the earth to preserve the illusion of order. Back at the mansion, Finch sat surrounded by documents, every page a lie he'd crafted to protect himself. But one line haunted him. Property sold for 17 cents. He traced the words with a trembling finger. "How do you destroy a memory?" he whispered. The ledger didn't answer. A knock broke the silence. Sheriff Dorsey entered, hat in hand. "The fire's out," he said. "They survived." Finch didn't flinch. "Of course they did," he murmured. "Fire purifies. It doesn't end things. It refines them." He leaned back, eyes distant. "Tell the town he's a thief again. Tell them he stole something sacred. Make the story fit the sin." Dorsey hesitated. "And when they ask what he stole?" Finch smiled thinly. "Say he stole a book." The next morning, Augustine Parish woke to whispers. A stolen holy book. A dangerous man loose near the swamps. Rumor moved faster than truth, Finch's favorite weapon. But the judge underestimated how fast a truth with purpose could travel. Kalin and O'Connell lay low, hidden among the reeds by the creek. The book rested between them, wrapped tight. "He'll come," O'Connell said. "He always does." Kalin nodded. "Then we'll make him remember." He opened the book once more, studying its last page, words written in faded ink. Truth cannot be owned. It can only be carried. He closed it carefully. "Then we carry it." For days they moved at night, following the creek north, deeper into the forgotten paths that only smugglers and deserters knew. The judge's riders searched, but the swamp protected them, a labyrinth of roots, shadows, and loyalty older than law. O'Connell's strength began to fade. His leg, injured years before in war, slowed him. "Leave me," he said once. Kalin shook his head. "No, you carried your ghosts long enough. This one's mine." By the 6th night, they reached the edge of Black Creek, where an old ferry crossing stood. The river looked endless in the dark. On the other side lay the path to freedom and to exposure. Kalin stared at the water. "He'll come tonight." And he was right. From the opposite bank, torchlight flickered. Riders, the judge's men. At their center, a silhouette too rigid, too still to be anyone else. Finch had come himself. O'Connell gripped his rifle. "You mean to fight?" Kalin shook his head. "No, to finish." He stepped forward, book in hand, raising it high so the torchlight caught the gold-embossed spine. "You tried to bury this?" he called across the water, "but it learned to breathe." Finch's voice carried like thunder. "You think that changes anything?" Kalin's reply was calm, deadly. "It already has." He tossed the book to O'Connell, then stepped into the shallows, wading forward until water reached his waist. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then thunder split the sky. A gunshot followed, echoing across the creek. Kalin staggered but didn't fall. His voice carried through rain and gun smoke. "You can kill a man," he said, "but not his proof." He turned once toward O'Connell, a faint smile ghosting across his lips. "Carry it," he said. Then the second shot came, and the water swallowed him whole. On the far bank, Finch lowered his pistol. "Erase him," he told his men. But the words trembled, because he knew deep down that erasure was no longer possible. The proof lived. O'Connell knelt in the mud, the book pressed against his chest. Rain hid his tears, but not the fire in his eyes. "I'll carry it," he whispered. "I'll carry it north." Lightning flashed, revealing his face streaked with mud and blood, and behind him, the faint outline of Kalin's body drifting away, silent, defiant, unbroken. Somewhere in the distance, a mockingbird began to sing. Morning came gray and reluctant, the sky above Augustine Parish bruised with smoke. The war between truth and silence had already begun, and only one side could be buried. O'Connell walked alone, the leather-bound book pressed against his chest beneath his coat. Each step northward felt heavier than the last. The swamps gave way to pine, the air thinning, the sound of insects replaced by the low moan of wind. He hadn't slept. He didn't need to. Men who carry the last words of the dead do not rest. They endure. Behind him, the parish burned quietly in its own shame. The judge's men spread their stories like disease. A thief drowned, a sinner escaped, a book of blasphemy recovered, lies written to sound like order. But in the hush between those words, a different version spread. Boatmen whispered of a boy who faced a judge and didn't kneel. Ferry keepers passed along his name in secret. Even the drunks in town spoke it under their breath, like prayer or rebellion. Kalin had become something the judge could never comprehend. An idea. O'Connell reached the edge of the parish line by dusk. There, in the fading light, he met a man waiting by a small skiff. "Silas," the man said, offering a hand. His eyes were calm but sharp, the kind that had seen both chains and freedom. "You came far?" Silas said. O'Connell nodded. "Too far to stop now." He pulled the book from his coat, its pages still damp with swamp air. "This is what he died for." Silas looked at it with reverence. "Then it doesn't die with us." They pushed off under moonlight, the water black and endless. Each pull of the oar sounded like a heartbeat, slow, relentless. O'Connell watched the parish fade into mist, its lights flickering like dying stars. He thought he could erase him. O'Connell said quietly, 17 cents, that's all it took." Silas shook his head. 17 cents bought the judge a ghost, and ghosts don't obey the law. For days they traveled, changing rivers, hiding by night, trading silence for safety. At every crossing, a new ally waited. Men who asked no questions, who carried messages written not on paper, but in faith. The underground moved like veins beneath the body of the nation. In a small town outside Natchez, they found shelter in an abandoned chapel. The walls were cracked, the pews half-rotted, but it felt holy in a way the judge's marble halls never did. O'Connell placed the book on the altar, lighting a single candle beside it. "You gonna open it?" Silas asked. O'Connell hesitated, then nodded. The ink was faded but alive. Words danced across the page like whispers that refused to stay buried. "Listen to this," O'Connell said softly. "Truth buried is truth multiplied. Every silence births another witness." Silas closed his eyes. "He wrote that?" O'Connell nodded. "Yeah, before the end." He looked at the flame, its reflection trembling in his eyes. The judge thought he'd written the final chapter, but this is only the beginning. Days later, word reached Augustine Parish. Whispers from river captains, coded messages etched on ferry posts. The book had survived. The judge's control began to fracture. His allies questioned, his clerks hesitated, and his name, once spoken with reverence, became a curse. Finch paced his study like a caged animal, his empire of paper crumbling around him. "A book," he muttered. "A damned book." He slammed his hand against the ledger, scattering coins across the floor. 17 cents, he whispered again, as if the number itself mocked him. At that moment, he realized what he had created. Kalin wasn't gone. He was multiplying in the minds of men. Each retelling of the story chipped away at Finch's dominion. Authority built on fear cannot survive remembrance. The judge's health began to fail. Nights became sleepless interrogations with his own reflection. In the mirror, he saw the boy's eyes, calm, defiant, unbroken. He began locking every door, burning every document that carried the boy's name, but the ghosts stayed. He died years later, alone in that same library. The books he had once owned now stared down at him like silent jurors. When they found him, his fingers were wrapped around the faded receipt, the same one that had sold a man for 17 cents. By then, the story had already escaped the swamp. The book reached Philadelphia by spring. A small group of abolitionist printers read its pages and wept. Within months, pamphlets began circulating in the North under a single title, A Parish of Lies. It didn't name the judge. It didn't need to. The words were enough. The pamphlet spoke of a young man sold for less than a coin, a leader of quiet defiance, a truth that survived fire and law alike. It spread like rumor, like vengeance, like resurrection. Years passed. The war came, the world shifted, and Augustine Parish changed names to hide its shame. But some things don't die. In the swamps, men still spoke of Kalin, not as a slave, not as property, but as the man who taught silence to scream. O'Connell lived long enough to see that pamphlet in print. He held a copy in his hands, rough and trembling. He'd lost everything, his land, his peace, but he'd kept the promise. "You carried it north," Silas said. O'Connell nodded. "And it carried me back." He died quietly, buried near a riverbank where mockingbirds still sang. In his coat pocket, they found a folded piece of paper, the final page of Kalin's book. The ink was faded, but one line remained clear. "The truth is not a wound, it's a door." Generations passed. The world forgot the names, but the echoes remained. Travelers spoke of a swamp where whispers followed you, where the wind sounded like pages turning. Locals called it the Judge's Rest, but old men knew better. They said it was where a story learned to breathe. Today, in a museum drawer, the original receipt still exists. 17 cents, smudged with age. Most who see it shake their heads at the cruelty of the past. But a few, the ones who listen, swear they feel the air change. Because the paper hums faintly, as if remembering. And if you listen close enough, past the silence, past the centuries, you can almost hear a voice whisper, "You can erase my name, but not my story." The light flickers once over the glass. Somewhere, a mockingbird calls. And for a heartbeat, the swamp breathes again. The story lives. The ghost of 17 cents is still walking,